We're still with eNCA Nightline. Your host Tim Bekile Mkhototo with you this Monday. So the recently released Stats SA report on inequality trends in the country has confirmed what many of us have been saying for years, highlighting a lack of transformation and economic growth for those living in township. That is obviously the country's black majority, as you'd have heard there referenced also in our conversation earlier about the DA. So research by the Human Rights Commission has also quoted figures from Stats SA, which show that about 2 years ago, 45% of black men were living below the poverty line of 647 rand a month, and a staggering 49% of black women faced the same reality. Let's talk further then about South Africa's inequality crisis with the Human Rights Commission's Mohamed Shafie Ameermia. A very good evening to you, Mohamed, and thank you for your time. So you look at this latest report out last week on inequality, and I want to quote for you here. It says, economic inequality decreased for Indians, Asians and whites, but remained fairly constant for coloureds and increased for blacks. For blacks, not surprising, of course, when you look at the historic data in this country, but why is it that things are still so tough for the majority black people in this country?
Well, thank you very much. Good evening to you and to your listeners. I think it's not an easy question to answer, but it's something that we have to reflect in terms of the fact that 25 years later, South Africa is still the most unequal society in the world, one of the most unequal societies in the world. And stats, although Stats SA's report would show a decline within group inequality between 2006 and 2015, which is a good development, but there is another side to the coin. And the other side to the coin is that it is a concern for the Human Rights Commission that the racialized nature of inequality still persists 25 years into the constitutional democracy. And that is that black Africans, in comparison to whites, as you indicated earlier on, are still far worse off. And there is also another element to it, and it's the gendered nature of inequality, which is another worrying factor for the Human Rights Commission. Now, if we look at these against the background of the Stats SA report, which confirms that poverty is racialized and underscores the fact that economic inequality manifests along racial lines, the findings of Stats SA accordingly supports the need for radical socio-economic transformation to ensure more equal distribution of wealth, income and socio-economic goods such as housing, health and education among different population groups.
Allow me to jump in there, because you are in the human rights space, and as you say, the issue with inequalities in this country is that it is racial and it is gendered. At what point does all of this constitute or amount to a violation of people's basic rights? Does it at all?
Indeed it does. And at what point? At the point of the fact that if Parliament could adopt the National Development Plan, which as far back as 2014 said that we need to get to 2030 at 0.6, and Stats SA today says it's highly unlikely for us to even reach that, because at the moment we are at 0.01, which they basically means there's no movement. And that is a worrying factor, and that is where the gross violations they start seeping into society itself. And always, in that case, it's always the poor who gets the wrong end of the stick. What we require is we require swift action, but it must be based on a rights-based approach, as opposed, to economic theories that go and talks to these realities on the ground. Because what it does, if we do it on a rights-based approach basis, we will find that obviously we can pinpoint the problems and we can address those things in line with radical economic transformation. It has to happen, otherwise we're not going to get any further. Now, what adds to this is the fact that we have lots of looting and stealing and maladministration, which eats into the public purse. Money is meant for service delivery into basic service, healthcare services, health, education, and all these other socio-economic rights.
Let me ask you this then. If we don't move from this policy-centric approach to more, as you say, a rights-based approach to solving inequality in South Africa, would you agree with those who've warned, especially in the last decade, that South Africa is perhaps at risk of a revolution or an uprising by the young black population in this country, and that is perhaps what is going to tip the scales going forward. Would you agree with that?
Well, why do we want to go into that space in the first place when we have a constitution that speaks about those inequalities and gives us a kind of a set works, parameters within which to operate to overcome those obstacles? Now, it's precisely because we're not doing those things we could end up in that space. And that's not, it's far-fetched. We're not being prophets of doom and gloom, but we are saying that we need to effectively and efficiently ensure redistribution of income and wealth from the top deciles of society to the majority of the people in South Africa. Now, that requires a kind of a Marshall Plan, and we have to stick to those timeframes. Now, where the Human Rights Commission would come in is we would have a monitoring mandate to ensure that
all right.
We will ensure that government lives up to its promises to the people.